Going in 5, 4, 3.
Welcome back to Online Shakespeare, and welcome to Hamlet. Hamlet is an exceptionally complex play, therefore this week's and next week's lectures will be divided into sections so that each section is not unduly long. Today it is not unusual for 400-plus essays and books on Hamlet to be published per year. If Michael Goldman is right in defining an actor as a man who wants to play Hamlet, and David Scott Caston is right in defining a literary critic as someone who wants to write about Hamlet, then this trend is likely to continue. There are a few things about Hamlet not immediately obvious that are helpful to know. First, there is not one Hamlet, but arguably three, the so-called Bad Quarto of 1603, the Second Quarto of 1604, and the folio text printed in 1623. Most staged versions and modern editions of Hamlet are based on the Q2 text with some emendations from the folio. Yet the Bad Quarto should not be dismissed so quickly, for it is in this version that Gertrude definitively rejects Claudius and comes over to Hamlet's side at the end of the play. Is this a mistake? Did Shakespeare change his mind about this? Why was this scene left out? We may never know. Many criticisms on Hamlet focus on the plot. The plot, however, was not Shakespeare's. The original source is a Scandinavian historical saga by Saxo Grammaticus. The ferocious and ultimately successful Amleth is not very much like Shakespeare's philosophical student from Wittenberg, but he shares one very important characteristic with him. Amleth, like Hamlet, pretends to be mad and, like him, despises falsehood. In order to protect himself, he tells the truth in such a clever manner that he misleads everyone. Shakespeare's play was not even the first Hamlet play in English. We know that there was an earlier play on Hamlet which is now lost. So, what is unique about Shakespeare's play? Revenge tragedies like the Spanish tragedy, the Revenger's tragedy, and many more were very popular in Renaissance England. Usually set in Spain or Italy, they often had ghosts demanding revenge, wronged parties swearing vengeance, and even plays within a play, as Hamlet does, and like Hamlet, end with plenty of blood on the stage. Hamlet, however, has two different elements, a different setting and a hero who does not trust himself. Hamlet is set in Denmark, a very different place from Italy or Spain. I sometimes say that Hamlet should be subtitled Revenge in a Cold Climate. Cool and deliberate, the atmosphere of the play is accordingly very different. Unlike other revengers, Hamlet does not trust himself. On learning of his uncle's treachery, he does not immediately plan revenge, but questions the message and the messenger. After all, Hamlet dislikes Claudius in any case. The ghost has simply told him what he wanted to hear. Because of his melancholy, imaginative, and scholarly disposition, he may have imagined the entire thing, or worse, he may be the victim of some sort of demonic temptation. The first half of Hamlet, therefore, is not about revenge, but about Hamlet's careful checking of facts before he commits himself he does another experiment, witnessed by the impartial and sober-minded Horatio. Do these things bear the ghost story out? Only then can he proceed. Then he must wait for the proper time and place. Ultimately, I would argue, Hamlet cannot enact the revenge enjoined on him by his father's ghost until several conditions are met. It must be in public, after a public revelation of Claudius's treachery to the assembled Danish court, and Hamlet himself must be on the point of death, and therefore avenging his own death and that of his mother, as well as that of his father. Finally, he needs to have the entire story told properly for truth's sake, as well as for posterity and his own reputation. So no wonder Hamlet and the melancholy Dane are so beloved by literary critics. In his imaginative capacity, his love of words, his careful and almost obsessive fact-checking, and his insistence on a carefully prepared narrative, frankly, he seems a lot like an English professor, and that's probably why we like him so much. So let's begin with Hamlet. First of all, Hamlet is not a biography. One of the things that people who think that Shakespeare's plays were written by somebody else pretty much all have in common is the insistence that Hamlet is their biography. And it's extraordinary because Hamlet couldn't possibly be the biography of so many people unless you accept that Hamlet has some qualities in it that many, many people can identify with and are very emotionally accurate. Another thing that was very common, when Freud came up with his Oedipus complex idea, he had a little bit of a problem applying it to Oedipus Rex because Oedipus doesn't knowingly kill his father and marry his mother. That's not something he wants to do. But Hamlet, who seems very mentally tortured, seemed to be a good argument for somebody who secretly did want to kill his father and marry his mother and therefore is jealous of Claudius because he does do that. So the thing is that became a very popular way to look at Hamlet. For a while that was just used as a subtext until, if you see the Mel Gibson version of Hamlet, Mel Gibson's Hamlet is all over Glenn Close's Gertrude. They're all over the bed and everything, but you'll have to see that one for yourself. Melancholy is a major motif in this play. It's something we saw a little bit in Twelfth Night. Melancholy is one of the four humors. And melancholy is not really precisely correspondent to the modern idea of depression. It can be a good thing. Melancholy is associated with contemplation, with a scholarly disposition, with intelligence, with the capacity for imagination. And yet too much melancholy can make one depressed, unable to act, and even indeed crazy. So that is one of the problems with melancholy. The Renaissance looked at it from all points of view. If Hamlet is melancholy, this has a major effect on the way he behaves. There are a number of people who are very likely to become melancholy or to have a problem with it. Scholars are likely to be melancholy. Lovers are likely to be melancholy. We'll see that a little bit with Ophelia. And also people who have just experienced a crushing emotional blow. And so obviously Hamlet fits many of those categories. Hamlet really exemplifies, in that sense, melancholy personified. There's a big political element to this play, and it's interesting to me that in movie versions of the play, that is very often the bit that is kept out. And yet part of the play is this political machinations of who is king and who should have been king, and also there's stuff that's going on in the Danish court that's very parallel to what's going on in the Norwegian court, and vice versa. There's a character named Fortinbras who is something like what Hamlet would have been like if he was a little more soldierly and a little less melancholy. One of the questions, too, is how old is Hamlet? That really depends on the version of the play you read. In the early quarto, he's described as it has to do with the dating of this little skull right here. Has it lain in the ground 7 years or 3 and 20 years? Because the length of time that this has been in the ground is correspondent to how old this person was when they died, and it's Yorick's, the king's jester, who was somebody Hamlet had played with as a child. In other words, Hamlet is either about 18 or about 30. And that makes a difference to the way you see him. There's a major religious element of this play. We talked a little bit about the split between Catholicism and Protestantism that happened in the English Renaissance. And this becomes a very critical part of Hamlet, part of the subtext. One of the things is that the older generation who believes in purgatory, who believe in certain kinds of things, seem to be more on the Catholic end of the spectrum. The younger generation, like Hamlet himself, seem to be more leaning toward a Protestant, specifically a Calvinist orientation. Now, one Calvinist belief at the time was something called double predestination. That is your $64,000 philosophical concept for the day. Double predestination is the idea that since God is omnipotent, And God is omniscient, knows everything, and always has known. And since he knew from before the beginning of the world who was going to be saved and who was going to be damned, who's going to heaven and who's going to hell, that God must have predetermined before the beginning of the world who was going to heaven and who was going to hell. Therefore, if you are going to hell, there is nothing you can do about it. You have no free will. And if you have no free will, this is a one-way ticket to despair. Despair is something that I like to think of as the Renaissance disease, this sense of powerlessness, this idea that you have no mastery over your own fate at all. And this is a major problem in Hamlet. Also the question about whether or not the ghost can really be a real ghost, because if you don't believe in ghosts and you don't believe in purgatory, then the ghost is lying, and if the ghost is lying, the ghost might be a demon. And we'll see a bit more about that later. Like Richard III, this is a very theatrical play. It talks a lot about theater. It talks a lot about illusion. A major theme is seeming versus being, the nature of playing, the nature of acting. The very name of the Globe Theater, where this play was first performed, lends itself to talking about what the Renaissance called Theatrum Mundi, which is the theater of the world. The fact that what he says, and Jaques says in As You Like It, all the world's a stage. And so it leads to this idea that not only the world is on the stage, but also there is a sort of a stage of the world that we, those of us who are watching Hamlet, are participating in this. Now, we talked about openings being very important. Richard III coming down and confiding to us in Twelfth Night, beginning with that sort of musing and music and that sort of romantic lethargy. The opening of this play begins in the cold, it begins in the dark, it's midnight, and we know all this because the characters are careful to tell us that. It also begins in a state of panic. 2 sentries alone on the stage, one of whom has to relieve the other, and who cannot tell what's coming next. So listen for the anxiety in this interchange. Who's there? Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Long live the king. Bernardo? He. You come most carefully upon your hour. 'Tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco. For this relief, much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart. Now, just a couple of lines. That was 10 lines, and that tells us an awful lot about the kind of paranoia that's going on. Later, we find out that one of the reasons they're so paranoid is that there's been a lot of preparation for war against Norway. They're expecting a Norwegian invasion any day now, and so they're nervous about that. They're also people who have seen a ghost 3 days running, and they're panicky and nervous about that. They have gone to the length of asking Horatio, who is a scholar connected with the Danish court. Why do they ask Horatio? Later on they say, "Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio." And one of the questions is, what is it? Horatio has a PhD in ghostology or something? No, the reason that they ask Horatio, well, there's 2 reasons. One of which is Horatio is a model for being emotionally stable. And Horatio is not likely to imagine something. So if Horatio says it's a ghost, it's a ghost. The other thing is that Horatio, like anyone who had been to university, has been trained in theology. And so therefore he would know all about ghosts and spirits and religion generally. And so hopefully he would know what to do if he saw a ghost. Now, one of the things that I think is clever about this beginning is that we're intentionally bored. Bernardo starts to tell the story of how they saw this ghost, and they all settle down, and we've kind of gotten a little bit this sort of droning explanation. Last night of all, when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illume that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one, "Peace, break thee off! Look where it comes!" So that's meant to make the audience have a heart attack. You're not expecting it, that the ghost comes in. And they do that again. There's a big long question about why is it that we're having this big war against Norway? What's going on? And in brief, the answer to why they're having the war against Norway is that the previous king of Denmark had killed the previous king of Norway. All of that person's lands then went to Denmark. The brother of the Norwegian king had become king, just the way that the brother of the Danish king, Claudius, has become king. And each of them has a disaffected son, a guy who should have been king, Hamlet and Fortinbras. Hamlet sits around being depressed. Fortinbras decides that what he's going to do is attack Denmark. And so he's got a very different response to being left out of things. So this goes on at some great length. It starts on line 80 and it keeps going on up to line 125, and they start talking about how portents are happening and comets and streaks of blood. And the thing is, I think you're supposed to lose your interest. I think the audience is supposed to start wandering off thinking, oh boy, when is this going to end? And then we don't expect the ghost to come back in again. Was sick almost to doomsday with eclipse, and even the like precurse of feared events as harbingers preceding still the fates and prologue to the omen coming on, have heaven and earth together demonstrated unto our climatures and countrymen. But soft, behold, look where it comes again! Okay, so we didn't expect that, and then they say, now, thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio, you talk to it. And Horatio asks the ghosts a couple of questions. I'll cross it though it blast me. Stay, illusion. If thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. If there be any good thing to be done that may be to thee do ease and grace to me, speak to me. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, which happily for knowing may avoid, oh, speak. Or if thou hast abhorred in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, for which they say your spirits often walk in death, speak of it, stay and speak. Stop it, Marcellus. Shall I strike it with my partisan? There, it is there, gone. Now, one of the questions is, how does the ghost get on and off? My bet is at this point, the ghost is entering and exiting through the stage doors, which are upstage. Remember, in a Renaissance theater. He's just wandering through like this, probably counterclockwise like the ghosts in Richard III, because that's what people would expect. Horatio asks a lot of questions of the ghost, and these are the things that you would expect a ghost to be walking around for. One of the extraordinary things about ghosts and witchcraft and magic is that even though it doesn't exist, there are certain things that we all know is true about magic. And one of the things that is often true about ghosts is that ghosts wander around if they have unfinished business, if they've died a violent death, if they have picked up some treasure that doesn't belong to them and they've left it somewhere, or in this case, if the king has this vision of something horrible about to come to his country, he'll come back and warn them. And so Horatio says, well, is it this? Is it that? Is it something else? Ghosts tend to go away when you resolve what they want. So that's another thing. It would be nice to get rid of him. Find out what it is and get rid of him. And so they decide, all right, this is really nerve-wracking. It was going to speak, but it didn't speak. Maybe we're going to have Hamlet come, because maybe the ghost, it's his father after all, will speak to Hamlet. This opening, in the cold and in the dark and in the panic, is very different from the scene which follows, which begins in court. It's almost a combination, wedding and coronation, of Hamlet's uncle to his mother. Yes, indeed. Hamlet's father has died, and within 2 months, his mother has married his father's brother. Hamlet thinks this is gross, and he's left out. This is a big, warm, luxurious scene. Probably every available actor is on the stage wearing the glitziest possible clothing with gold or copper lace upon it. And it probably has Hamlet standing down in the extreme edge of the stage, dressed much the way I am, totally in black. This is wearing mourning to a wedding, and it's almost a calculated slap in the face. When Claudius gives his opening speech, a lot of people have a lot of trouble figuring out what it is he's saying. There's a reason why it's hard to make out what Claudius is saying. He's a very oily guy, and he doesn't like to be pinned down. So it's hard to figure out exactly what he's saying because he's being intentionally obscure. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it us be fitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe, yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, together with remembrance on ourselves. Therefore our sometime sister, now our queen, we sort of slide that in the middle where no one will notice it, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere, with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a dropping eye, with mirth in funeral, and with dirge in marriage, in equal scale weighing delight, and dole taken to wife. So the real business of this is, even though our brother just died, we married Gertrude. And then he hastens to say, nor have we herein embarred your better wisdom, which have freely gone with this affair along, as you gave us permission to do. So this is something that the Danish court has said it's all right for Claudius to do. They've given permission. He thanks them, and then he proceeds to take care of a bunch of business. He sends off some messengers to Norway to find out what's going on with these attacks, to let the King of Norway know it's happening because they don't think he knows that Fortinbras is attacking Denmark. And then in comes Polonius and Laertes. Claudius makes a reference to Polonius being his right hand. He says, you cannot speak of reason to the Dane and lose your voice. What wouldst thou beg, Laertes, that shall not be my offer, not thy asking? The head is not more native to the heart, the hand more instrumental to the mouth, than is the throne of Denmark to thy father. What wouldst thou have, Laertes? So Claudius is bending over backwards to give Laertes something he wants, and that's because Polonius is so important to him. That means Polonius can't be the idiot gasbag that he's sometimes portrayed as being. Laertes wants to go back to France. He gets permission to go, and then we finally get to Hamlet, who has been sulking. But now, my cousin Hamlet and my son, a little more than kin and less than kind. So there's something unnatural. It's unkind, unnatural, and yet there's too much kin. There's something incestuous about being somebody's son and nephew at the same time. And his mother, Gertrude, also tries to remonstrate with him and says, why are you so depressed? Why are you wearing all this black? Why are you not snapping out of it? Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common. All that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. Ay, madam, it is common, suggesting that she is common. If it be, why seems it so particular with thee? Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of the breath, no, nor the fruitful river of the eye, nor the dejected behaviour of the visage that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for these are actions that a man might play. But I have that within, which passeth show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe. This brings up the major theme in our play, seeming versus being. Hamlet says, No, I am not mourning because I'm wearing black for my father. I am mourning inside. It's the inside that creates the mourning. And Claudius gives him some hollow comfort. He says, don't feel so bad about it because everybody loses his father sooner or later. Now, of course, when you consider that Claudius has killed his father, that's kind of a little bit, that's not very good advice. The other thing is that somehow veiled in this criticism, or the saying, stop mourning, is a bunch of insults. He says, to pursue in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified, or mind impatient, and understanding simple and unschooled. So in about 5 lines, Claudius has suggested that Hamlet is unmanly, that Hamlet is dumb, that Hamlet is uneducated, and that Hamlet is also irreligious. And that's amazing how he manages to cram that into such a short space and still kind of gloss it over with a little bit of sugar. And the end of it is, while Laertes has gotten to go back to school in Paris, Hamlet is not permitted to go back to school in Wittenberg. Now, Wittenberg is associated with 2 famous people from the point of view of the Renaissance stage, with Martin Luther, who founded the Lutheran Church, even though that's not what he meant to do. It's a place of Protestant thought and ferment and protest. And it also is the home of Dr. Faustus, a scholar who thought that he could make a deal with the devil so that he could learn everything. So there's these 2 different models that are connected with Wittenberg, and I suspect that is why Hamlet is made a graduate of Wittenberg U. Hamlet agrees to stay, even though he does not want to, and when everyone is left, you see that he has developed a profound distaste, a profound dislike of life and everything that it entails. Huge hatred of self, huge disgust with the world. And listen to the difference between this soliloquy and the kind that we got from Richard III, who was coming down and talking directly to us. Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the canon everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Oh, God, how weary, flat, stale, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on it. Ah, fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross, nature possess it merely. That it should come to this. But 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion, to a satyr, so loving to my mother that she might still not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she should hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month, let me not think of it. Frailty, thy name is woman, a little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body to the grave like Niobe, all tears. Why, she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle. Now you listen to that. He's interrupting himself. This is a person whose sanity or inside, his internal spirit, is split. And he's talking to himself like we're not even there. It's not as though he's confiding in us like Richard III. It's a very different way of using this kind of soliloquy style. Now, Horatio has the awkward task of telling Hamlet that he's seen his father. And if you can imagine telling somebody who's in a state of so much grief that his father's ghost has been walking around, it's a very tricky thing. Hamlet's happy to see Horatio. He's a fellow student from Wittenberg, and he then says, I shall not look upon his like again. I'll never see somebody like my father again. And Horatio has to say, I think I saw him last night. In fact, there's a very funny bit where Hamlet says, my father, Methinks I see my father, and all the people who have come in to tell him this are, Where, my lord? They're almost expecting to see the ghost appear again. And Hamlet asks some very searching questions. Well, what did he look like? Well, did he have his helmet on? What was he wearing? If he had his helmet on, was the mask up or down? What was his beard like? What did he look like? He wants to know the details because he doesn't want to believe this too quickly. And then he agrees, yes, I will go, and I will see this, and I will try to speak to this ghost. Now, in the next scene, which is Act 1, Scene 3, we get to see Laertes and Ophelia. And one of the big questions that everybody always wants to know about Ophelia is, did she sleep with Hamlet or not? My favorite answer to this question is John Barrymore. Somebody asked John Barrymore if Hamlet slept with Ophelia, and he said, only in the Chicago company. But in this particular case, Ophelia can't really have done anything because, of course, she's a fictional character. When this play is staged or made into a film version, usually the director and the actress have to make some sort of decision about that. In your case, when you're interpreting it, I will leave it up to you. Laertes makes sure that Ophelia is aware that maybe she should not trust everything that Hamlet says. He doesn't say that Hamlet doesn't love her. What he says is this: perhaps he loves you now, and now no soil nor caudle doth besmirch the virtue of his will, but you must fear his greatness weighed, his will is not his own. In other words, maybe he really does love you, but he's not going to be able to marry you because he's the Prince of Denmark. He's not going to be able to choose. And so what I want you to be careful of is not to get too invested in this. Now, a lot of people immediately seize on the fact that Laertes says, don't lose your chastity, don't lose your virginity. But there are a number of things Laertes is concerned about. Then weigh what loss your honor may sustain if with too credent ear you list his songs, or lose your heart, or your chaste treasure open to his unmastered importunity. Fear it, Ophelia, fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affections out of the shot and danger of desire. And he's talking about this as though it were a war, as though she were going to have to keep out of the cannon shot of Hamlet's desire. He's worried about his sister's emotional fragility. Don't lose your heart. Don't lose your honor. Don't lose your reputation. Because even if you behave well, the fact that you're spending all your time talking to Hamlet is going to have a bad effect on your reputation. Laertes doesn't seem to be particularly pushy on this issue, the idea that Hamlet does not really love Ophelia. Polonius, as we'll see in a minute, has a very different approach. But one of the things, too, is why do they both, Laertes and Polonius, assume that Hamlet is just in it to get Ophelia into bed and to dump her? Well, there's nothing we've seen about Hamlet that suggests that he's that kind of guy. What I'd like to suggest is that the guys in the Polonius family, that's the way they behave, and so they expect it of other men. Polonius has a long speech, the neither a borrower nor a lender be speech, which I'm not going to go into in a great deal of detail, but when you look at it carefully, you can see that this is all very political advice. You know, look like this, listen to everyone, keep your mouth shut, be careful of your friends, pick them carefully. If you don't get into many fights, but if you get into a fight, make the other guy know you've been into a fight, all of these things. And then finally, he says, oh, by the way, and act natural, to your own self be true. It's very political advice, it's kind of slimy. And it tells you something about Polonius, the kind of person he is. So that might alter your opinion. So when Polonius is played as some kind of a senile guy who never knows what he's doing, that sort of is mitigated by this view. He's also very worried about Ophelia. He wants to know what they were talking about. He wants to know what was going on with Hamlet. And he insists that, in fact, not only is Hamlet after Ophelia for unreasonable reasons, but also that Ophelia is kind of dumb, that she's believed any of this. These blazes, daughter, actually he says, springes to catch woodcocks. I do know when the blood burns, how prodigal the soul lends the tongue vows. These blazes, daughter, giving more light than heat, instinct in both, even in their promise, as it is a making you must not take for fire. From this time be something scanter of your maiden presence, set your treatments at a higher rate than a command to parle. In other words, I know perfectly well how young men are. I've been young myself. I know how quick people are to promise things that they don't mean. So that tells you more about Polonius than it really does about Hamlet. He gives her very strict orders. I don't want you to talk to him. I don't want you to write to him. I don't want you to have anything to do with him. And she says, yes, Daddy. I think modern girls are very inclined to think, well, why would she do that? Why doesn't she defy him? But you have to consider the cultural difference between a girl in the Renaissance, a fairly young girl in the Renaissance, and a modern teenager who would never, perhaps, listen to her father in this way. We move into the ghost, coming back again in the next scene. And one of the questions, one of the things that they're worried about is whether or not this is a demon. Hamlet sees the ghost, and the ghost motions him to come away, and they try to stop him. And Hamlet says, I don't care. What can it do to me? I do not set my life at a pin's fee. And for my soul, what can it do to that, being a thing immortal as itself? And Horatio says, no, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm afraid that it might tempt you to jump over the cliff. I'm afraid that it might suddenly reveal itself in some horrible form and drive you crazy. I'm concerned this is a demon. I want you to be careful. And Hamlet refuses to listen, and he runs ahead. He wants to hear this. Now, this is a problem. When somebody is melancholy, when they know they're prone to imagination, when they know they're prone to think the worst, that means it's going to be extremely difficult to really believe in what you see. He sees a ghost, but he can't trust himself. The other thing is that what the ghost tells him is exactly what he wants to hear. The ghost tells him briefly that he was killed by his uncle. Well, Hamlet already hates his uncle. This is, in fact, exactly what he wanted to hear. And if a ghost shows up and says exactly what he wants to hear, maybe that's a little suspicious. And the ghost also says that he's coming from purgatory. He says that he's doomed for a certain time to walk the earth and then to spend the day confined to fast and fires. Well, if you don't believe in purgatory, that can't possibly be true. Another thing that's very common, I mentioned that in revenge tragedy, usually the idea is the ghost comes and says, I'm going to walk around until you get revenge, and then I'll go away. But this ghost is going to walk around and haunt things, whether Hamlet kills his uncle or not. So the question is, what good does it do the ghost, except for emotional satisfaction, to have his murderer killed? So that is something that they're concerned about. There's a certain emphasis, too, upon Gertrude's sudden marriage to Claudius. Hamlet had thought their marriage was perfect. When he hears this from his father, he hears that, in fact, Gertrude had started an affair with Claudius before he actually died. So this is something that had already gone on, something Hamlet did not know. And he ends by saying, adieu, 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 remember me. Now, in this case, the ghost probably goes down through the trapdoor in the floor of the globe. And that means he's underneath this wooden floor that vibrates like a drum. So that when he cries out, swear, everything echoes. And the audience is around the globe stage, and they can suddenly hear the ghost appearing near them. And that is a shock effect. It's something hard to imagine in our days when we're used to movies, but it's still very frightening. Hamlet decides he's not going to confide in these guys right away. And what he does is he makes them swear. And he starts to get very crazy. He says, let's move over here. And he keeps making all these references. You hear this fellow in the cellarage, can you work on the earth so fast? A reference to the actor playing the ghost walking around under the stage with this echoey sound. And they do ultimately swear. And then Hamlet says, promise that you will not only will you not say anything of this, but when you see me in the future, I'm going to start to act very strange. I'm going to put on what he calls an Antic Disposition. I'm going to start to act crazy. Don't even hint that you know anything about it. And they promise, my lord, I will not. And then he says, the time is out of joint. O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. This is Hamlet's destiny. It's a miserable one, but you're stuck with what you're stuck with. And the question is, what is that Antic Disposition going to look like? Well, we'll see